Everyone. Thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions for if you have any questions along the way for our presenter, you can type them into the GoToWebinar chat box, likely found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can type them there as well. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Pam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Happy April Fool's Day. I promise there'll be no tricks or pranks in my presentation today. I am not that funny. But we will talk about the ick, which all the kids say these days. So I will start with just telling you about myself. My name is Pam Georgiana. I am a brand strategist and content writer. Working with purpose-driven organizations, nonprofits, healthcare, those kinds of types of clients, just sort of helping them match their mission to their brand so they can have better and more successful fundraising and marketing. We're here today to talk about overcoming the ick factor, rethinking branding in the nonprofit sector, and let's dive in. If my slide would advance. There we go. So just to sort of level set what we're going to do today, we're going to sort of talk about understanding how brand clarity can influence your fundraising, your reputation, and your long-term growth. Recognize signs of brand misalignment that can be hindering your progress, differentiating between branding and marketing and the outcomes that you're ultimately responsible for, and identifying practical steps to measure brand strength and consistency. So the goal today isn't to talk about marketing strategies because that is not really what brand is. It's really to talk about how branding and your brand, your organization's brand, is a factor of all of the challenges that nonprofit leaders are experiencing today, whether it be, fundraising in an economic uncertain market, or demonstrating impact, or differentiating yourself in, among all the other organizations that are doing great work, about maintaining kind of a reputation that is both engaging and strategic and powerful, right? So all of those things brand has an impact on, and I think it's a little bit of a disconnect as to how important brand is to nonprofits. So that's where we're going to start, is sort of addressing the ick, right? So like I said, ick is kind of what the kids say these days, when they think about something that's kind of like not for them or kind of off-putting. And I think, when I talk to a lot of nonprofit leaders, that is sort of the initial kind of response when you say the word brand. I mean, I think, they'll sort of automatically think about like the Nike swoosh, or like a really flashy Super Bowl ad, or a jingle that you hear on the radio over and over and over again, you can't get out of your head. But that's not really, none of those things are really brand. Really, that's marketing. It's a communication of brand, but it's not really a brand. Brand is much more of an intangible asset. It's something that every organization has, profit, nonprofit, public, private, small, large, doesn't really matter. Even us as individuals have a brand, and that is what we're talking about when we're talking about how brand can affect, the long-term resiliency and power and impact of a nonprofit, right? Your brand is really your reputation. It's the perception that people have of your organization. Whether it's impact, it's credibility, it's stewardship, it's authenticity, how memorable it is. That is your brand. I think Jeff Bezos said it best once when he said that brand is what they say about you when you're not in the room. That is a brand, and that is a very, very specific and tangible asset that every organization has. And if you don't, if you as a leader of that organization don't have any kind of input or strategy behind your brand, the market and the community are going to create that brand for you, and that's not always a good thing, right? You want to have sort of a control over that narrative, right? So what branding actually could mean for nonprofits is, you know, aligning your team around shared priorities, leading, you know, to more consistent and strategic decision making. A good brand will foster trust among all of your stakeholders, whether it be donors, volunteers, clients, political leaders, the community at large. It'll strengthen your long-term fundraising momentum, and it'll help you stand out in a competitive funding environment, especially right now when, you know, everyone's doing really, really good work and we're all kind of competing for share of purse, right? Your brand helps you stand out as an organization who is really, really being impactful and using donations wisely. So, you know, impact and growth really stalls when you don't, when you're not, your stakeholders don't really understand your brand, which comes down to your mission or your value. So I hope that kind of helps you think about your brand, not in that ick way, but in something that is really, really important for any leader to think about and have control over and consider as an asset of the organization. And I think a really good example of this right now of how important brand is, if you consider the Boy Scouts, right? So Boy Scouts have been around for what, hundreds of years. And, you know, and I think, you know, in terms of brand, they've got, everyone knows about the Boy Scouts, right? Even if, you know, you weren't a Boy Scout when you were younger, you knew someone who was, or at least you knew what they did, right? They have, for hundreds of years, they had a very powerful brand. But, you know, 20 years ago or, you know, something along those lines, you know, their brand started, you know, kind of eroding because of, you know, factors that, you know, they weren't really controlling, you know, the scandals over some of the scouts, the leaders, you know, not doing what they're supposed to do, right? Or, you know, the fact that the conversation kind of turned to, well, why don't they let girls in, that kind of thing, the whole gender role conversation. You know, those two things right there were big hits to their brand, and their brand really suffered in the last 20 years because of those things, because the leaders had, you know, very little control over all of that. And so what they actually did just this year is they completely rebranded they're now Scouting America. They're catering to both boys and girls, and they're being very, very transparent about their processes and their procedures, and, you know, how they vet their leaders and their volunteers and all of those kind of things. I mean, they really intentionally redid their entire brand and all of the strategic direction around the organization behind it, so that they could be more resilient for the next 100 years, right? Their brand was no longer serving them. And so they needed to come up with a completely new brand and operational strategy behind it in order to, you know, continue to thrive into the next 100 years. And so that, I think, really shows you the impact that perception, reputation, and just sort of community, you know, awareness has to an organization. And that's all branding. That all comes down to branding. And, you know, you as a leader have control over all of that, or at least somewhat control over that. You have a say in how that narrative is structured. So let's talk a little bit about what else can happen if you don't kind of, you know, think about your brand in terms of your strategic direction. I think we've all talked about mission drift before, about how, you know, sometimes, you know, we want to do really good things, and so we sort of take on programs and things and that aren't really necessarily part of our initial mission, right? Well, that it also can lead to brand drift, right? So our strategic priorities shift, or they're more reactive to pressure in the market, or departments start communicating impact differently. Maybe, you know, your marketing department says one thing, but your fundraising department says another, or one program talks about, you know, community impact, and one program talks about, you know, individual impact. the messages start getting a little bit, they start shifting a little bit and aren't really aligning. Maybe your programs expand faster than your strategic clarity did. You bring on those extra programs, you take on those extra clients, and they don't really fit into the strategic direction of your organization. Your stakeholders might struggle to explain your value. Your leadership spends time sort of re-explaining direction. Every time you have to, you talk to a new donor, a new corporate donor, something like that, you've got to sort of overcome some of the initial kind of like misconceptions or wrong assumptions that folks have about what it is you do or who it is you serve. That's all brand drift. And over time, this really, creates a diluted differentiation. You may either sound like everyone else in, that's doing the same work you're doing, or you're just not sounding like you are very impactful in what you do. It could slow your fundraising momentum. It can cause internal friction between teams if no one's sort of aligned in what your impact is, and it reduces your long-term influence. So, brand drift, again, it's rarely dramatic. I mean, the Boy Scouts, they were great for, 80 years or whatever. And then just recently that, over the last maybe 2 decades that brand, that brand drift has sort of changed how folks sort of look at them and think about them. But it can be very highly consequential in terms of your resilience and your momentum and your impact. So it's really important to, again, be really, really intentional about what your brand is and how you're sort of you're thinking about your brand when it comes to all of the things that you're doing on a daily basis. And the easiest way to do that is to sort of develop a brand framework. This is not a marketing document. This is a strategic plan, part of your strategic plan. It's basically aligning your organization around a brand framework that will sort of inform all of the things that your organization will do over the next, whatever that strategic plan is, 5 to 10 years. And the easiest way when I talk to my clients about, about their brand, the easiest way to sort of think about that brand framework is in a pyramid shape. You want your brand to always be rooted in the foundation of your mission, vision, purpose, and values. Those will, should never change. They may shift a little bit, but they should never fundamentally change. And so if you build your brand on top of that foundation, all the things that sort of go, forward will be authentic and credible. So if you start there with your mission, vision, purpose, and values, and then kind of layer on the target audiences or the folks that you want to impact and engage, not your clients, your donors, your volunteers, your staff, the community at large, your advocates, the folks that are, the community leaders that are kind of working, either for your clients or for your issues or your purpose. All of those things are your target audiences, and they should, you should know who they are, and you should know why your mission is so important to them. You should know why they would want to engage with you and have the same purpose, have the same values. It's really important to understand your target markets and your target audiences when you're building your brand. And then your value propositions, which are sort of the promises you're going to make to those target audiences, right? You're going to, you're going to alleviate hunger in your specific community. You're going to provide volunteer opportunities that are impactful and meaningful to your volunteers. You're going to provide a workplace that is, that is purposeful for your staff. All of your promises that you make to your target audiences, those are your value propositions. And again, they should speak to your mission and your audiences so that everything sort of hinges together. And then on top of that are your differentiators. So there's lots of our organizations doing really good work, that's similar to yours maybe, and you're all doing great work, but you need to find that sort of one thing or two things that make you unique. Maybe you do things a little differently. Maybe you serve a specific sort of audience. Maybe, your your programs are just slightly, more, you use a piece of tech that makes you unique. Whatever those differentiators are, those are really important to know, because that's where you're going to stand out from the crowd, right? But you want to make sure those differentiators are important to your target audiences, fit with your mission, and are something you can promise to do. So again, this is just this framework for a brand that, sort of all hinges together and will be the lens by which all of the decisions you make, in terms of operations, in terms of staffing, in terms of, programs and client services, all of the things, these will be the lens by which you make all of those decisions through. And then after that, you get into sort of more of the marketing part of the brand, right? So your voice, your visual identity, like your logos, your color palettes, that kind of thing, your personality, how you speak to your target audiences, how you, words you use, words you don't use, your writing style, all of that kind of thing is in that third from the top kind of bucket on your brand framework. That's where your marketing starts coming into play now. And then on top of the pyramid are your messaging pillars, which are your really sort of important, the important kind of impact statements and messages that you want to make sure that really, highlight what you do, highlight your target audiences, highlight your differentiators, and really, engages your audiences in a way that, that keeps them coming back for more, wants to, become advocates for you, become, volunteers for you, donors for you, so that, those pillars should really be something that really speaks to your impact. And then your content, your brand book and your content templates are at the top, and that kind of, again, goes back to the messaging that you'll need to do to sort of speak about your brand. So I hope you can see how this brand framework, is really more than marketing, it's more than communications, it's more than fundraising. It really comes down to an operational strategic framework that informs all of the leadership decisions that you would need to make in terms of making your organization credible, authentic, and resilient. Your mission will inform your program expansion. Any program expansion that you want to make that's not going to cause mission drift or brand drift. Your positioning will, or your value propositions will, affect your fundraising strategy. Your visual identity, if it's done correctly, will build your recognition, build your awareness, right? Your content standards and your content templates will protect your reputation. All of these things kind of hinge together and fit together so that you have a better kind of handle on your operational strategy and your sort of future thinking, growth, and alignment. And just to really, bring the point home in terms of branding is not marketing, the way to look at it is that branding provides strategic direction, marketing provides strategic expression, right? So, branding defines who your organization is and why your work matters. Marketing communicates that work to your specific audiences, right? Branding clarifies your mission, vision, audiences, positioning, just like we said. Marketing kind of activates the campaigns and the storytelling that kind of tells your story. Branding should guide all of your leadership decisions and your operational priorities. Marketing promotes your programs and initiatives and your fundraising excellence efforts. So, branding will build the trust and differentiation and organizational credibility that goes along with long-term resilience and impact. Marketing is more of that sort of short-term kind of participation and awareness and support that, kind of the campaigns that you do on a seasonal basis or on a monthly basis. So, branding is really a leadership's responsibility. It's really the responsibility of the leaders of the organization, much more than marketing. Marketing is an operational function. I hope that kind of explains a little bit more in more detail about the differences between the two. I think that's a really fundamental shift in thinking that a lot of leaders need to do when it comes to branding. And it's, brand clarity is really important for your organization, right? It's one thing to do this nice brand framework and, have it all in one place that you can kind of look at it, but, and kind of, feel like you're on the right track. But it's really, really important to make sure that that brand framework is embedded in your organization. It's embedded in everything that you do and all the policies and procedures that you have, so that everyone within the organization, and then everyone that's engaging with the organization really, really understands it and kind of can experience it and recognize it when they see it, right? That clarity is really important, because the impact really extends far beyond communications. When you have a clear strategic focus around your brand, and you can build really, really strong stakeholder trust, really. That clear strategic focus means that you'll make more consistent decisions. And your priorities are really anchored in your mission and the audiences and the people you're serving and your position in the market. That consistent decision making really makes sure that your strategic focus and your growth is going in the right direction. Like I said, it's clarity brings around a lot of deep operational alignment. Your programs, your partners, the community, your donors, your volunteers, everyone is sort of aligned, and sort of reflecting a unified understanding of your purpose, and sort of helping in terms of allocating resources in a way that is consistent with your brand and with your strategy, and your goals. Clarity also really, really is the one thing you need to build strong stakeholder trust. We lose trust in the organizations who are kind of all over the place when it comes to messaging. Donors see that, they see that, and they experience that, and that disconnect makes people wonder, well, are they really doing the right thing? Are they really, using my donor dollars wisely? Are they really being stewardships? Are they, how much of impact are they really having if, their brand is kind of all over the place? So having a brand clarity really helps everyone, all of your stakeholders, going to understand your impact quicker and support it with more confidence. Positioning and differentiation and consistent storytelling really helps, your fundraising momentum. You're not consistently having to retell your story over and over and over again. You can really build on, one campaign to another, because you're being clear and you're being consistent with your message and with your impact statements, and people can, sort of embrace that clarity and embrace that consistency, and really want to learn more, want to know more, want to do more for you. So it kind of, it just sort of deepens that momentum and keeps it easier to sustain. You'll have stronger reputational resilience with, when your brand is clear. You won't have to worry about brand drift. You won't have to worry about folks kind of making their own decisions about, who you are and what you do. Your clarity brings a lot of credibility and authenticity to your brand. And you'll have greater growth, long-term growth capacity. Brand clarity, that trust is built over time. And so all your strategic initiatives, all of your fundraising, all of your, goals are all kind of, going along the same pathway. And so growth follows with that. So brand clarity definitely, sort of overcomes the drift or the mission drift that is a, is a struggle for a lot of organizations right now. And you might be thinking, well, this is all well and good, but, branding is, expensive, right? I can't just sort of redo my whole brand right now. That's just really expensive. And I think in reality, it's, branding is not a investment in overhead. It's an investment in your capacity, right? It's when you have when you do the work to make sure that your brand is strong and hinges all on your foundation of your mission and is clear, and everyone is aligned with it, you're building your capacity. You're building your long-term credibility and resilience. And there's data to kind of back this up. Nonprofits that invest in a strong brand are 50% more likely to report increases in fundraising revenue than those that don't. 68% of nonprofits agree that strong visually appealing brand increases their volunteer interest and engagement over time. Nonprofits with a strong brand identity report 74% more recurring donations than those without a well-developed brand. And we all know how much recurring donations, how important they are to our resiliency over time. Those recurring donations are the hardest to capture and keep. And they're also the most important because they keep our doors open on a lot of cases, right? So, it's really, I think, important to think about branding not as, and not as just a money, and not just an investment in your really tight resources, but in an investment in your capacity. Stronger brands, for the most part, lead to greater trust and loyalty. Your donors and volunteers are much more likely to engage and stay loyal to your nonprofit when you have a consistent and clear brand strategy behind you. They understand, they can see that, and they understand that. And it drives your long-term impact. It's not, it comes down to donor retention and, and the cost of, the donor lifetime value. Those are the more important kind of ROI measures of brand than, than donor acquisition or just a one-time donor would, donor would be. And that's how you really measure brand in a lot of cases. It's a long-term commitment, right? You're not going, you may not, you may not see that ROI immediately, but when you're building capacity, you're having more predictable fundraising cycles, you're having higher recurring donor participation, you have lower costs to getting, to acquiring new donors, you're having more kind of success in advocacy and in, kind of finding those, those leaders who will help you kind of move that needle when it comes to sort of, the policy changes that you would, like to see. You're just having greater resilience, basically, especially, when leadership transitions, or markets change, because you've got this framework that you are all kind of working towards and making decisions through. So again, look at brand as sort of building your capacity, not as sort of a marketing campaign or an investment in investment in a one-off project type of thing. And so, good, I'm on time. So I think in terms of your key takeaways here, your first takeaway would be to conduct an audit of how your organization is aligned in terms of brand. I do have a audit that is linked on this document that you'll have when after this call, that you can kind of link to and look at. It's basically just a group of questions that kind of get you thinking, your team thinking about how aligned you are. Some of those questions are, do your board and your leadership describe your mission and your values in the same way? Can your major donors explain what it is you do and how unique that is if asked? Is your messaging consistent across all of your departments, internally and externally? Can you, do you have to spend a lot of time clarifying direction and clarifying impact when you have those conversations about, about what it is you do, that kind of thing. Those are some of the sort of elements of conducting an audit to kind of see how aligned you are right now with your brand. And that's an important first step. And then, once you know that, you can clarify what it is you want to be known for. Think about that brand framework, and sort of layer on all of those pieces of your brand and sort of clarify what it is that's important for you to keep as your brand, and to know and to sort of work through what you want to be known for. And then start using your brand as a strategic decision filter. Every time you make a decision operationally, or whatever, use brand as that filter to making that decision. That will help go a long way in terms of keeping your brand clear and strategic and clear and strong. And then sort of establish those KPIs so that you can see how strong your brand is, whether it be donor retention trends or recurring giving or stakeholder trust signals, staff alignment. Those are all really important brand KPIs to think about. When you start thinking about all of this, I think the main sort of takeaway here is that not to think about brand as a flashy a flashy logo or a fancy website. It's really to think about your brand as your most valuable asset, right? It's something that you should invest in to strengthen your resilience and build your long lasting relationships with all of the folks who are supporting your organization. When you do that, you'll have more clarity, move faster, build trust faster, build stronger trust, and sustain your impact longer. So it's the foundation of your organization's success, not about slogans or visuals. I've got some resources here that you can look at, and when you get this document, that'll help you kind of give a little bit more information about brand and how important it is for you to kind of lead with clarity around your brand. And I thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate you spending the time with me today to kind of talk about this. If you'd like to get in touch with me, that's my website, email, and phone number. And we can take questions if we have some time.
We do. We can absolutely take a couple of questions. Thanks so much, Pam. For any of our attendees, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the questions tab. I haven't seen any come through yet. What is the question you get most often from people when you give this presentation? We can do that and see if attendees have any questions. Again, please put those in the chat or the questions tab.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the question I get a lot is, well, once we sort of do, we establish what our brand is, we can just kind of move on, right? And that's not necessarily. I think brand is something. I think it's really important to think about your brand as part of your strategic planning. Right. So every time you do a new strategic plan, you should also revisit your brand, that brand framework, and kind of look through and make sure that everything is still kind of hinging together and is still really applicable to what you're doing as an organization and where you're going as an organization. Strategic. So I think it's really, just like you have strategic plans every 3 years, every 5 years, we should definitely build your brand, looking at your brand framework into that strategic plan so that you are making all of those decisions within the confines of your brand.
Amazing. Oh, we did just get a question that you ended up answering with that frequently asked question, so that's great.
Good.
I'll give information on how to obtain the slides after this in our closing statement. So if you're looking for that, hold on till our closing statement. How do you distinguish between comms, marketing, and branding? You share the difference between branding and marketing, but this is a question I have.
Yeah, so like I said, branding is really the framework by which you make your marketing decisions, right? So, you know, you and you make your communication decisions, right? So when you're whatever comms you're doing, whether it be you know, fundraising appeal, or building awareness around your organization, or you know, writing a press release for, you know, for an award you won, all of those things should be written with it using your brand strategy in mind. So using your personality correctly, using your writing style correctly, using, you know, your messaging pillars correctly. So one of your messaging pillars is that you are a leader in medical research for you know, cancer or whatever. You want to make sure that your, you know, the message that you're writing for your fundraising is reflecting that pillar, that message, that pillar that's part of your brand, right? That you're a leader in research. So I hope that makes sense. So your brand is really informing your comms.
Perfect. Okay, we are running out of time, so we do have 2 questions, but please no more questions to attendees. Do you have a visual example of branding versus marketing? I think my team is using the 2 incorrectly.
A visual example of branding used incorrectly. I think
no. Branding versus marketing. Do you have a visual example of branding versus marketing? The person thinks their team is using the 2 terms incorrectly.
in the document, other than the table that we had in my presentation, I think is probably the easiest way to look at it.
Perfect.
So I would take this back to your team and say, you know, which are you doing here, and you know, why, you know, and make sure that you're kind of aligning on the reasons why you're doing it, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense to me. Okay, last question. What is the best way to communicate messaging pillars when multiple staff members across different teams are creating and sharing content?
That is really important. So messaging pillars should be very much a document that you are sharing across teams, right? So, you know, and there should be content templates that speak to each team's needs, right? So if your messaging pillars is that you're a leader in cancer research, then you have a content template for your marketing team that includes headlines, CTAs, social media posts, depends on how much in the weeds you want to get, but you know, that team would be able to use, that speaks to that messaging pillar, but is in the language that they would need to use for the target audience they're reaching. Same with like internal organization, you know, for HR purposes, same for volunteers, you know, same for press releases, that kind of thing. So you build out your messaging pillars and then you write content templates for each messaging pillar for each department, and then you make sure that they're shared across the board and used consistently. It's not if you're doing this, I will say that this is not an easy lift when you're starting out, but once you get it set, and you know, your marketing, your comms becomes much easier and more consistent.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was the last question. So Pam, if you have any last parting words for our attendees, please please go ahead and do that now, and then I'll give our closing statement and explain how our attendees can get the slides.
Thank you all, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate your time and your attention. Branding is something I love to talk about. It's my favorite topic ever, especially for nonprofits. You know, I love working with nonprofits. And so, you know, if you'd like to get in touch with me, I put my information back up on the screen there. Please do. I'd love to talk.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Pam. This workshop has now come to a close. If you're interested in receiving the recording materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Pam, for educating our community. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.